We got a great show for you today on Browns Film Breakdown. Where we're going to talk about the Browns' final seal of approval for their stadium, which launches before we know it. And then we're going to talk about offensive line play with one of the best covering offensive line, defensive line in the NFL. It's a great show. Stick around and join us for the latest Browns Film Breakdown. Welcome in, everybody. Browns Film Breakdown. I'm your host, Jake Burns. We are here on Tuesday, July 1st. We made it to July. Hope you're well. Yesterday's podcast, we hit on a slew of topics, including the bigger Pittsburgh, Miami random end of June, early July NFL trade, which ends up being a player swap. It includes Jonnu Smith and some picks, and just not the type of deal we normally see in June here. We usually see these types of deals closer to training camp or in training camp. So that was a surprise to say the least. So we broke that all down. All of that's covered for you. Check out yesterday's show in audio form. And a quick reminder that if you are here, whether, video, audio, YouTube, whatever, subscribe to the channel, however that is, audio form. So, the Spotify, Apple, leave us a review. That's greatly appreciated. And then obviously that thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube is also greatly, greatly appreciated. So the biggest thing you can do, come to the website, join us. We're getting into the summer months here. We're actually kind of closer than we've ever been, obviously 20 days, 23 days away from training camp, and it's going to hit the ground running very soon. We're excited for that. But coming to the website, joining us now and getting in and ahead of the curve would be the best thing you can do. But ultimately, just tell somebody about brownsfilmbreakdown.com. We greatly appreciate that. That spreading the word about this website, about this community is a big part of what helps us continue to grow. So that is the first and last thing we would ask you to do. So thanks for doing that. Otherwise, the only piece of news from the last podcast drop to today is that the Browns now have officially every piece of the budget now passed through every part of Ohio government. It needs to be passed through. Governor Dwan signed on that last night before the turn of midnight, and the $600 million contribution from the state is locked into place for what ultimately could be a $2.4 billion project that is going to be a lot of Haslam funds, a lot of state funds. It's record-breaking in nature. It's going to be a huge stadium. Brook Park in 2029 is going to be here, and that is now locked and loaded. It is a done deal that they are going to move to Brook Park. So, the Modell law got changed. We talked about that last week to include up to the same county. The Browns couldn't leave that. So that was amended. And this is all stuff we thought was going to unfold. And, the city was, sort of posturing, doing their best to make themselves look good publicly to fight it, air quotes, fight it. But this was a locomotive that's been moving downhill for some time. The Haslams wouldn't have put themselves in this position. They wouldn't have gone public with so many things unless they thought they were going to get here. But as far as the official state of things, DeWine signing off on the budget that's in place. It includes many other things, ultimately way more important than football. Understand that is a topic of great discussion for people, but all I can do is tell you what I know, and that's $600 million is locked in from the state. How they're using it, how they're pulling it, a different conversation in and of itself. But they will be in Brook Park in 2029, and that is all moving downhill. So that's the biggest piece of news, and you'll hear a lot about it throughout your early morning and into the afternoon here. But otherwise, again, continue on the website. We're talking about players coming into this year. We're going to continue that series, but today I have a special episode where I'm going to talk to Brandon Thorn, who runs Trench Warfare, which you will find linked at the bottom of this podcast or video, wherever you're watching it. To go over to his Substack, which is obviously a part of the Substack network we operate on. We recommend his show. Obviously, he does a full website there and goes along with all the podcasting and stuff he's doing. But it's a more broad look at the NFL as a whole, looking at specifically offensive, defensive line play, but really focusing offensive line. He does a great job on that. And with the nature of the Browns' offensive line, where it's at, age, performance, the transition to Bloomgren, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So when we're looking for somebody to get an opinion about where they are right now, where they need to go, who's on the roster, younger names, Brandon's the best guy to talk to about it. So we're going to do that. We're going to get to that right now with him. And it's a great segment. I think you're going to enjoy it. So quick word from our sponsors, and then we will get over to our time with Brandon right after this. All right, we're excited to have Brandon here. I really don't think there's anybody who's collectively across the league breaking down offensive line play at a whole. So Brandon, we appreciate your time, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Always happy to do it.
Yeah, let's talk. So digging into some details, I saw you today posted about some of what Duke is doing with the offensive line. Kind of seems like he's doing some unique stuff that the rest of the league is tapping into across individual sides of things. And what I want to ask you is, as we've seen the tight end use stuff, and we've seen more across the league, groups of guys coming together, the edge rushers coming together at the pass rush, some of the stuff they do you think this is changing? This is kind of a broad, sweeping question, but is it changing the quality of play across the league where these guys are getting together, sharing more trade secrets? And it feels like more than ever, there are players across the league trying to prop each other up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think with what Duke has done there, that's spearheaded that idea probably more than anywhere else. And he's been building what he's been doing now for the better part of a decade, maybe a little bit more. So I'd say over that time, it's gradually increased. Offensive linemen working together. Primarily with Duke. I know other guys train offensive line around the country, former players and whatnot. So they have groups too. But I think Duke's is kind of at a different level, just in terms of the sheer amount of guys, let alone the quality of guys. So that ecosystem that he has created there is pretty unique still, even with the advent of training elsewhere. Just because if you're a young left tackle coming out, planning to enter the draft and you're trying to decide, how you want to prepare to get into the NFL, just say you're a tackle, guard, or center, you look at Duke and he has what I think is the best center in the league in Creed Humphrey training there, at a routine basis. So, you want to pick his brain. Oh, and Eric McCoy is, right there next in line behind Creed, getting ready to do the same drill. You want to talk to him. Tyler Biadish is there, so on. I mean, there's just every single position. There's guys that are either have made a Pro Bowl, All Pro, maybe are going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. So it's a really cool environment if you're a young player or if you're a veteran as well, just to bounce ideas off of guys. And I think that we have seen that help to a certain extent, in the NFL on the field. When you're watching film, there's a little bit better play, I would say overall in some respects, but at the same time, I don't think it's done enough. I don't know if anything can do enough to combat the fact that there's just not a lot of human beings walking around that can play offensive line at a high level, especially tackle. I think that's the hardest. But yeah, so with that being said, I still do think that it's made a little bit of a dent, into that problem, and it's a really cool thing to think about, and it's a cool dynamic.
No, it is. As much of that stuff as, and I know the Browns have been involved to some extent over the years, various players, but yeah,
Mhm.
they certainly need to keep tapping into that. The wealth of knowledge these guys share across just their own, setup, let alone getting with Duke, who's so extra, specifically, focused on that expertise is well worth their time. I ask you that because when you look at the Browns, and I'm going to open the floor to you on this because this seems like an offensive line that has been, buzzed at the top of the NFL for quite some time. And maybe time caught up with them last year. Maybe, injuries have just taken a toll on the group collectively. But I'm not to say you've done, everything outlook wise for this year, but you got a good feel for who they are. They're going to probably play Dwan at left tackle to start the year. And then the four others have been around between Jack, Joel, and Wyatt and Ethan for a bit here. And they took a step back last year. So I'm curious, what your perception of them is across the league with where they're at now versus those years that they were a bit more I guess youth is the way to say, because they're just getting a little older here, but I do think there's still enough, and I'm curious if you think there's still something here that can reach that level they used to be at.
Yeah, maybe not that level. The peak that we've seen in recent years. I don't know that they're going to reclaim that necessarily. It's possible, but I would probably say probably not. But I do think that they could be decidedly better than they were last year. But of course, that's a very low floor. They really kind of dropped off last year. But I think this is kind of a similar dynamic to a few other teams that we saw where it was a collective failure as much as anything. So you kind of have to take a step back and look at it a little more broadly, which, I know you do with the Browns, but I think that is really important context when you're trying to assess the offensive line because just watching the film over the last few days in preparation for this again and just last year, I mean, it was kind of obvious in the moment as well, especially when, Deshaun Watson was out there playing quarterback. I mean, he was doing the offensive line no favors in pass protection. They were passing the ball. I think they passed the ball more than any team in the league last year. And then, so the amount of drop back was as high, if not higher, than anybody in the league, or just passing the ball, I mean. And then you had a quarterback who played, a decent amount of snaps, who was hurting the offensive line, I think, much more than anything else. So if you want to just look at their pass protection and the numbers and things like that, and you watch the film, I think you have to kind of look at it through that lens of what they were asked to do and then what they had to try to overcome behind them in the quarterback for the most part. So that was a huge part of them taking a step back, I think. Then you add in the fact that the run game was, not really a threat, not very efficient. Um, you're just kind of operating kind of, behind the eight ball there, so to speak. And then you add in things like, Wyatt Teller's MCL injury, and, that's probably your best player. He missed a chunk. And then he kind of wasn't the same for a little bit after that. You had injuries at tackle and, just, Batonio took a little bit of a step back, especially early on. But I don't think that, now that we're at this point, I don't think that it was as dire of an outlook in 2025 as maybe you may think on the surface of like an outside observer. When it comes to the offensive line, because of all that other stuff, they made some changes, with the coaching, with the scheme. I would expect it to level off a little bit. And, right now I haven't done my offensive line rankings yet, but I've kind of put a preliminary list together and I kind of see them as like a, below average unit going into the year, which is a unit you could probably win with. Like in the 20s, early 20s somewhere is probably where I'll feel comfortable at this point in the calendar. We'll see in another month after camp gets started and all that sort of stuff and how things hash out. But yeah, at this point, that's kind of how I see them. And I think that they have a ceiling to get to, top 15-ish, top 20 level, like average. So I think that's in the cards, but there's still a lot of questions. Who's playing quarterback? What's that going to look like? I'm sure it's probably going to be a little bit better than what they had last year. But I think the big thing is that gives me some hope is maybe the scheme being a little bit better than it was last year as well. And if you could get just below average quarterback play, in terms of what I mean by that is specifically in the pocket, then your handling of the pocket, then I think you could probably get like an average-ish offensive line this year.
Yeah, I think the thing that stood out to me is they shifted a lot to RPO stuff last year. Not that they were leading the league in RPO throws, but they did it a lot to run as they really couldn't get under center as they used to prefer to sort of level up their play action game and things like that. And I think what I've tried to explain to people, Brandon, you can tell me if I'm wrong, your reaction to this is like, inside of the halo that is provided when RPO run game happens, it's more basketball pick and roll style. You can't really drive. You're trying to shield almost to create run lanes in certain space. So it changes the level of aggression you play with because you can't get caught 3 or 4 yards downfield. Football's thrown. It's a flag. And I think that can sometimes trickle into your state of mind at the position. I think Joel Bitonio and Jack Conklin both had time after the season talked about this a little bit, a little bit of how it tied into Andy Dickerson, who I know is now the assistant out in I think Las Vegas now, but like the nature of the way they talked about it, how they felt they were being coached, how they felt that the approach from a mentality standpoint that was so different from Bill Callahan, which is like, we are the point of attack. We're moving, we're winning the line of scrimmage. And then you run a lot of RPO stuff and you try to layer that in. And it feels like just such a different way to think for an offensive lineman, where you go from, double teams and dry blocks or reaching on outside zone and trying to, cut off backside to now I just need to be in this box and win with my leverage and turn and I don't know, man. You might think I'm crazy with that stance, but that's something I just picked up on them last year.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. I think, especially when you have a revolving door at quarterback and you don't really have like much of a threat to pass the ball necessarily. Like, there's not a lot that scares you. There's not a lot of teeth there with weapons quarterback. Well, if you're going to be RPOing it a lot, I mean, what does the defense have to respect there? I mean, you become pretty predictable, and then when you add in the fact that, yeah, in the RPO system, you're not able to typically be as aggressive as you normally would be if you're just under center and things like that. So you add those two things together, and it's not really a good recipe to succeed in running the ball. Not to mention just on a lower level, like revolving door a little bit at left tackle, and guys being dinged up as well. And so it's just like, I'll just go back to the kind of the original thing too. I just think this was a collective failure on a lot of levels, and that's really the big takeaway for me. Looking at the offensive line last year was just like, you need other things to help you out as an offensive line. I mean, if you're unless you're like the 2016 Cowboys or the 17 Eagles, or one of these all-time great offensive lines where you have three Hall of Famers out there in their prime, which they didn't. Um, you know, by and large, that's just not the case anywhere. So you do need your quarterback to help you. You need your scheme to help you. You need fortunate injury luck and things like that. And they didn't have any of those things. And then, but yeah, on a kind of a specific nuance level, I do agree with your sentiment there with the RPO scheme. And, but that's why I think that didn't work, is just for those reasons.
I agree. Okay, yeah, there's a couple guys I think people are really interested in your opinion on. I know you watched a little more of DeWand in his rookie year than
Yeah.
his second year, but he obviously had that MCL issue, and then it felt like second year, and he's admitted to this, he came back a little out of shape. I thought that hindered his ability as such a big guy to shut off speed rush, corner turn, and that really messed with him in a way. So I would like to just anything you have on Dwan from watching him, because it feels like, Brendan, they're going to give him the chance to be the left tackle this year. Got 3 of those starts late in the year, uneven, but I know that and this might echo a little bit of what you saw as a rookie. Just had more moments in pass protection you wouldn't expect, versus the run game stuff was sloppy technique wise. Just was very lethargic when in the run game, where maybe in college he's getting a bit away with some of that stuff by sheer size. The NFL caught up with him in the run game. But yeah, curious on him, and then we'll shift to the other two. But yeah, it feels like the linchpin of this whole thing for them is, if Dwan can help be an answer either left or right through this year, they can start to look at formulating what the future looks like, maybe a post Joel Batonio Posick scenario, because they are in a bit of a transition period here.
Yeah, I think I would agree that Dwan Jones's performance in 2025 is really important for the outlook of the offensive line for this year and beyond. And looking at his film last year, I mean, of course, the context, coming in, out of shape, and those sorts of things are very important, because especially for a guy like that who's 370, 380 pounds or whatever, and it's he needs every ounce of workouts and time and reps, and then switching sides, playing a position that he hadn't played at any length of time. I mean, all those things add up, and it really diminishes what is already, I would say, below average movement skills for his size. That's kind of just, when you're 300 and 60, 70, 80 pounds, whatever he is or more, your movement skills aren't going to be very good unless you're like Jason Peters. But that guy was kind of an anomaly. So yeah, I think it did affect that to a large degree. I also, his rookie year, I think one of the best things that Bill Callahan did that year, and kind of how he deployed Dwan Jones, was having him vertical set a lot, which I thought really helped mitigate his lack of movement ability, because it forced rushers to run through him, as opposed to him setting at a 45 or flat or whatever and having to go chase guys, or create all this space out there. He picked his spots with that. as a rookie. But for the most part, I think bread and butter was setting vertical. And it's like, okay, as a pass rusher, you have one or two choices. Typically, you got to run through him or try to go around him. If you're going to go around him, he's already so vertical that you're probably going to get pressed past the quarterback's drop point. So therefore, you have to try to run through him. And it does a really good job with his hands, getting his hands on guys first, establishing first meaningful contact with his hand size, his arm length, his wingspan. So it kind of mitigated the bull rush. So he was just put in a really good position as a rookie to succeed. And then, you go into the second year with all those other outside factors in play. I think you kind of got what you would expect out of him. I mean, there's glimmers there of him being able to play left tackle. I don't see him if he, it comes into the season in shape and, takes it serious. I don't see why he couldn't play left tackle at a serviceable level based on what I saw last year. So I'm, cautiously optimistic, I would say, for him to play left tackle at a functional level this year.
If he doesn't, it feels like Cornelius Lucas is probably going to find some time. I think he's obviously swing tackle throughout his career. It is bit more extended time at left tackle recently and has been around some good teams. So it feels like he's the play if either Conklin's health waivers at any point or like we mentioned there with Dwan, it just doesn't quite click. And maybe they decide, hey, we're going to try to move Dwan back to the right side, see if we can get some comfort there. And, it's just so wildly important for them to try to get something out of Dwan that can mean a second contract. So I'll be curious how they go about it. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about Lucas from what you know and what the Browns fans can expect, and then maybe a little bit of their most important interior depth guy, which is Zach Zenter, now a little further removed from that nasty injury at the end of his college career, and I think there's some hope that he can be a part of the future there at guard. And I know he snapped a little bit too at OTAs and stuff just in case to be ready to roll. But yeah, he's certainly more of a guard than anything else. So yeah, hit on those two for us if you can, Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, Cornelius Lucas he is what he is in terms of being a career backup, swing tackle, serviceable guy in spurts. Definitely not a guy who you feel comfortable with starting every game, but it could kind of get you out of kind of a prolonged pinch, 5, 6, 7 games or whatever it may be, kind of get you through a lull. Doesn't really do anything great, doesn't do anything horrible. I'd say he's probably just above the line at pretty much everything. But this is a guy who I would say definitely is well below average in terms of his movement skills, his ability to recover. These are the thing, kind of the hallmarks of, the top tier tackles in the NFL. He just is lagging there, and I think that's kind of why he has been a career backup or swing key backup, I would say. But he's a guy who's efficient. I mean, he gets the most out of what he has. He's pretty good with his hands, pretty good with his footwork. He can compete with most competition. You want to shield him, of course, if you're going against high level pass rushers, true drop back, things like that. But he's seen a lot. He's been in a lot of different systems. He's reliable in terms of knowing what to do. He's not going to have any glaring MEs, MAs, missed assignments, or just missed blown blocks, things like that. So that's why he's sticking around as long as he has because of that. So yeah, he's kind of the prototypical short term swing tackle kind of guy. So I think that's what you would get out of him. So I understand the signing, especially considering the injury concerns that they do have with their starting tackles, especially Jack Conklin. And then Zach Zenter, he's a guy I evaluated coming out of Michigan. I gave him a 4th-round grade. I saw a potential role player there. I compared him to Andrew Voorhees, actually, who is, has a chance to start. I think he probably will start at left guard for the Ravens this year. But yeah, I mean, he was a 4-year starter at Michigan, coming from a very run-heavy scheme at Michigan, extremely run-heavy, 60+% of the time they were running the ball. So not very, I would say, well-versed in pass protection, not very tested. But he's a guy, just reading out of my report, competent, accomplished, mature player, good size. He's extremely smart in terms of on and off the field, making good decisions, and he will strain and finish blocks. He plays the offensive line the right way. Coach clearly when you watch this guy's film, you learn about him. He's a guy that I think coaches probably will like more than scouts, if that makes sense. But a guy who can add value to the offensive line room for quite a while, I think. I think he has some starter upside, but I think for the most part, this is probably going to be a key interior swing backup, who again could probably get you out of some spurts and probably in the ideal scenario as a starter, probably be like your fourth or fifth best starter on the offensive line. So for 2025, I don't know that that's possible with the Browns.
Right.
But yeah, he's a nice player to have, as like your sixth, seventh offensive lineman, I think.
Good to hear. Okay, so it feels like the rest of the division, we'll close with this, has been investing in O-line. The Bengals have been trying to rewrite it. They've spent a first rounder, Pittsburgh multiple. Feels like the Ravens have been investing in some different ways. They got Ronnie Stanley kind of back in a better place, but they've been interior O-line investing, and then got an answer there at right tackle kind of late. Second round, I think, last year. So anyway, it feels like the rest of the division has been trying to rewrite them. The Bengals for so long were kind of a punching bag for O-line play. The Steelers kind of aged out of their group and all of that. And it's hard here. I'm not saying necessarily to rank them per se, but it does feel like the other three in the division have surpassed the Browns here with just the youth and direction and investment to their O-line, which happens. The Browns lose 3 first-round picks, well documented, right? So that happens.
Right.
And I do think the Browns, if the run at the end of the first round didn't happen at this draft with Simmons and Connerly, were maybe going to go that direction, but those guys got snatched up quick. So I'm not saying the Browns haven't wanted to. It's just been more opportunity cost. But I do think the rest of the division is solidifying theirs. Where do you stand on those three teams headed into the year?
Yeah, I would probably put the Browns and the Bengals in kind of a similar camp in a lot of ways because I see a lot of question marks with the Bengals still. I mean, I like the two young players that they added in the draft, but it's kind of hard to assume that either one is going to be a solid starter. I kind
Yeah,
of have some hopes for Jalen Rivers being that, and Dylan Fairchild more of a long term play. Um, so yeah, Fairchild, interestingly, is kind of a guy who some reminded of Wyatt Teller, and now it's Scott Peters there. That's kind of interesting, but
yeah,
yeah, I just I mean, Orlando Brown will, and Amarius Mims, just the way that they structure their offensive line is interesting. Just definitely one of the biggest offensive lines in the league. Um, you know, downhill power sort of system. Joe Burrow, I think, helps them a lot. They're just operating that offensive line from a totally different infrastructure and scheme and everything than the Browns are. So it's kind of hard to compare apples to apples. But I think just generally speaking, they're both more of an unknown, I think, going into this year. Them for their interior, and I would say you guys for the tackles. Just in terms of like banking on guys being solid or better at those spots for the whole year. I see it kind of similar questions there, but they, I would say, have a better infrastructure just in terms of continuity, and then also the quarterback, of course. So they're in a better position that way. And I think the Ravens and Steelers are just comfortably ahead of both of those teams, just from a personnel perspective. Also, of course, the Ravens, run heavy, and you got Lamar.
yeah.
I mean, life is the offensive line in Baltimore is living a much different, easier life than the other three teams in
Right.
the division. That's for sure. But Ronnie Stanley did have the best year he's had in years, so that's very encouraging. He's their best starter, I would say. Well, him or Tyler Linderbaum. I think that's a discussion. Maybe Linderbaum, definitely as a long-term starter because he's so much younger and doesn't have all the tread on the tires worn off. But yeah, so they have those two kind of, I'd say, like top 10 at their position sort of players. Stanley fringe top 10, Linderbaum certainly top 10. And then Rosengarten was, a pleasant surprise as a rookie there, the second round right tackle. They have questions at guard, I would say, but yeah, just the infrastructure is so good there. I see them as like a fringe top 10 unit, maybe like, top 15, firmly top 15. And then the Steelers is like the 15 to 20 range to me. There's question marks there for sure. What are you going to get out of Aaron Rodgers, of course, and just how that meshes with Arthur Smith. But I have a lot of high hopes for Troy Fautanu, the right tackle who was hurt last year, who's coming back playing right tackle. I think Zach Frazier has a case. I think he's firmly like a top 3 center already. He was a rookie last year, so I'm very high on him. I thought he was outstanding. So they have, some question marks still, but I would rank it Baltimore, top 12 or so unit overall in the league. Pittsburgh top 20, and then the Browns, top 25, and then the Bengals somewhere in the 25 to 30 range. Honestly, I just will wait and see there. So that's kind of how I see them in the order, and then just kind of relative to the rest of the league.
Well, listen, anytime we can talk trenches in the offseason, that's always welcome on this show. So, Brandon, we greatly appreciate your insight. Tell folks where they can follow your Substack as well, which I've mentioned several times, but just a good reminder from the person who does the work.
Yeah, so trenchwarfare.substack.com. People could go there, check out all my work. I have a couple of cool interviews recently with some offensive line coaches in the NFL. Hopefully going to have another one soon. And then my big offseason projects are still to come, probably in July, August, which is my offensive line almanac, and then my top 75 overall offensive linemen in the league, which, there'll be a couple Browns in there for sure. So, yeah.
Fantastic stuff, man. If you are interested in O-line play from both a micro, macro level and learning the inside out stuff, which is, I know what a lot of you guys like to hear because folks of this show care about the deeper details. You won't find a better place to learn about O-line, D-line stuff than from Brandon. So we appreciate your time, man.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Big thanks to you guys for being here, and a big thanks to Brandon for stopping by, hanging out, talking Browns offensive line with us. Again, reiterating a lot of the things that we know, which is it is not the group it used to be. There's still potential if they stay healthy and the coaching clicks, the scheme clicks, quarterback play is good. It can get up there. It can get to a top 15, perhaps top 10 level. But this is not the offensive line of years past. They're going to be in major transition in the next few years. Hopefully, some of these young guys, Zenter, Dwan Jones, can play a part in that transition. They really could use it. So good stuff from Brandon. Make sure you follow him. Make sure you go subscribe to his website, where I think you will vastly improve your knowledge through his almanac and different things he has coming out of how offensive line play works and how it all integrates into a cohesive offensive game plan. So check it out. Thanks for being here today. Another great show coming for you tomorrow. Newsletter coming out today as well. Keep your eye out for all of that. Great content consistently from brownsfilmbreakdown.com. The community you guys are driving, it's fantastic. We're going to have some Q&A stuff, going to have a mailbag that we will pop into the fold in the next week or so with some off-season questions for you guys. As again, getting close, 20 days or so, and we'll be hitting the ground running with the NFL training camp right around the corner. Thanks for being here today. Appreciate you guys much, and go Browns.